Hi all, welcome back to software engineering course. Let's get started. So we'll start our discussion from this risk management planning. First we'll see the concepts, the assessment, control and a practical risk management approach. Okay. So first thing, what is risk? Risk is nothing but the unforeseen events. Okay, it may occur or it might not occur. It is a unforeseen events, like it is not expected ones. Okay, so yeah, so risk we call it as unforeseen events. Then a risk is a probabilistic event that might occur, it might not occur. So this is a basic understanding of what is a risk. Then what are the risks in the project? So when do we say the project is in risk? So, what could be the unforeseen events or probabilistic events that might occur in a project? So, some of the examples for that could be whenever your project is going on and in the critical time, some main resource or the resource in the sense the person, he or she leaves the company, or he or she is on a long leave. Then what should happen to that particular project? Who will be there to handle it? Or say suppose you are doing a Python project but you have not got the proper resources or the persons who are skilled in Python. You have got Java resource. Then how will you take these Java resources and then how do you build a Python project? Or some earthquake happens in your project area, then what are the things, what are the measures or the management you need for this risk? So these are all some examples of what could be the risk in the project. Okay, so first we'll understand the risk management concepts. So the formal definition of risk, it goes something like this. So your risk is defined as exposure to the chance of injury or loss. That is, risk implies there is a possibility that something negative may happen. It is not sure thing. It may happen or it might not. So once that risk, in the project it happens, then what could it do? So it can have the adverse effect on your cost, quality and schedule. So your whenever there is a risk in your project, you might go out of budget, or you might go out of time, or the quality might be compromised of your project. So we have this risk management team. Okay, so what they'll do is like they'll foresee some of the events that might occur in a project, and they have their uh, set of task to be done. Getting it? Okay. So this risk management, it is the area it tries to ensure that the impact of the risk on the cost, schedule and quality is minimal. Then what is the aim of this risk management? So the aim is to not avoid getting in, it is not avoid getting into the projects that have the risk, but to minimize the impact of the risk in the project that is undertaken. This means the aim of the risk management, it says like you cannot you might know that okay, this project is gonna do, so it is not like you should not take this project, but you have to take the project and you have to make necessary changes in the project, or you have to take some steps in the project so that whatever, even if there is a risk, it should be minimal, so that your cost, schedule and quality is not compromised. So that is the aim of the risk management. Okay, now, so this is the entire classification of that. So your risk management is divided into two types or two parts. One is risk assessment, two categories. One is risk manage assessment and another one is risk control. In risk assessment, we have again three categories: risk identification, risk analysis, and risk prioritization. In risk control, we have risk management planning, risk resolution, and risk monitoring. So first we'll look into risk assessment and its categories, then we'll see these things. Okay. So the first one is risk assessment. The goal of your risk assessment is to prioritize the risk so that the attention and the resources can be focused on the most risky items. Okay. So you have to first make a list of the risk and prioritize them, and so whatever the highest priority risk is that you should be focusing on those items. So the first step in the risk identification is it is that you have to identify all the risks that are in your project. Okay. So now these risks are project dependent. Understand that it is project dependent, and identifying them is an exercise in envisioning what you can go wrong or where you can go wrong. So the methods that can aid or reduce or identify the risk identification, it includes checklist of possible risk. So this checklist is nothing but a document where you have the risk listed from in a project from your past experience or surveys, brainstorming sessions, meetings, or any other things. Okay. Now this checklist of frequently occurring risk are probably the most common tool. It is a common tool for occurring risk for the project. Again, based on your previous projects or whatever meetings or surveys are there. Now, so based on these surveys of your experienced project managers and all, right, Bohem, he has produced a list of top 10 risk items. So Bohem is the one who first came to forefront the tutorial on risk management. So he has identified some of the risk by discussing it with the project managers, their experiences and all. So the top five are listed over here. Okay, the top five risks that could occur in a project are these things. The first one is personal shortfalls. So what does it mean? So this involves just you are having a fewer people than the necessary. Like if you need 10 people for your project but you do not have that much resource with it, like you have one or two persons, then how do you complete the project, right? So this can be one issue. Or like we had seen, like you have a Python project in your hand but you have Java resources, you do not have the proper skilled people with you. This could be a risk, right? So some of the ways to manage this type of risk is like to get the top talent possible. So if you have Python project, try to get a Python skilled person. Or if you have not got Python skilled project, take Java skilled, provide them training so that they are familiar with Python and they can grasp quickly, right? So the second item is unrealistic schedules and budgets. So this happens very frequently. It is due to the business and other reasons. Okay, so it is very common that high level management they impose a schedule for the software project. So that is not based on any of the characteristics, or it may be unrealistic. So this planning or schedule of the project would be decided by your management. Say suppose you have a complex project in your hand, and while developing you might you know that like it needs another 3-4 months to get completed, but the deadline is say within 15 days. So this is an unrealistic schedule. Or even the budget, it could be the same. Okay. Now, so the next few items here, they are related to the requirements. Okay. So the project run in the risk of developing the wrong requirements or the wrong functionalities where the analysis is not done properly, and if development begins too early without the analysis, or similarly some improper user interface may be developed, or if these things are developed, it would require extensive rework of the user interface later on, or the software benefits are not obtained because the users are reluctant to use it. Okay. The last one is gold plating. It refers to adding the features in the software that are only marginally useful. So this adds unnecessary risk to the project because gold plating consumes resources and the time with a little return. Getting it? Next. Next, we'll see the another category, that is risk analysis. So here what happens is, in the analysis, the probability of occurrence of the risk has to be estimated, along with the loss that will occur if the risk does materialize. This means, so say suppose we had taken one of the examples of project risk is like people living in between the project. So what is the probability of that? So if people are leaving the project in between, so how to manage this thing, you have to analyze that. So how analyze analysis goes on is like, so through the discussions or using experience or understanding of the situation. So the last one is risk prioritization. So once you have identified the risk and once you have analyzed the risk, now you have to prioritize, give priority to the risk, whichever you have found out. So one approach is to use the concept of risk exposure, which is sometimes we call it as risk impact also. So we have a formula for that. So risk impact or risk exposure, it is defined by probability of unidentified or undesirable outcomes into loss due to unsatisfactory outcome. So you have here prob of u, that means the probability of your risk, that is the undesirable outcome, then the loss. So if this risk occurs, what is the loss of that to your project? So by this formula you will get the risk impact or the risk exposure. So the loss is not only directly financial loss, so it can be a loss of property, loss of future business or life. It could be life as well. Okay, the higher the risk exposure or the risk impact, the higher the priority of the risk item. Next, the second category is risk control. Okay, so in this risk control we have again three subcategories. The first one is risk management planning, second is risk resolution, and the third one is risk monitoring. First we'll see about the risk management planning. So the objective of the risk management, we knew that, right? That is to identify the risk and then prioritize them. So once your project manager has identified and prioritized the risk, so those risks can be identified easily. The top ones can be identified easily. So then question comes like what to do about the risk. Okay, you have identified it, you have prioritized it. What is next step, right? Then comes your risk resolution. Like once you have identified, prioritized, you have to resolve it. So one strategy is to use the avoidance, risk avoidance. That means you have to take all the actions that can avoid the risk altogether. So for example, if you have take the example of your project building which is in an earthquake prone zone. So risk is the earthquake. It can happen anytime or it might not occur as well. So what happens if it occurs? So what is the solution for it? How do you avoid that? So what you can do is you can shift the building from the earthquake prone zone to a not earthquake prone zone. This could happen. So some risk for some of the risk your avoidance might be possible, but it is not always 100% true. So for most risk, the strategy is to perform the actions that will either reduce the probability of the risk or it will reduce the loss due to that particular risk. So these things we call it as risk mitigation steps. Okay, to decide what mitigation steps to take, a list of commonly used mitigation steps for various risks is useful. For example, if you take a risk like lack of people with the right skills, for your project you need Python resources but you have Java resources, what is the mitigation plan for it? So one plan is like to train the resources. You give them develop coding sessions. They try to develop the practice of Python. So this could be a mitigation plan. Again, manpower attrition if it is a risk. So what could be the mitigation plan? You could train a core group of people. So rotate the assignments among the people and identify backups for them. So these are risk mitigation. It is nothing but once you have the risk, what is the solution for it? Okay, that comes under your risk resolution. The last thing is risk monitoring. So risk in a project should not be treated as a static, and they must be monitored and evaluated periodically. This means, so say suppose once you have a risk and once you have resolved that particular risk, you should not consider it is like, okay, this risk is gone from the project. No, it is not static. It might again happen next. Okay. Now the risk monitoring is the activity of monitoring the status of the various risks and their control activities. So one simple approach for risk monitoring is to analyze the risk afresh at each major milestone and change the plans as needed. If suppose during development you saw the risk as like the key developer has left the firm, left your company, then what is the resolution for it? So you can get a new resource who has the same experience as the previous one, and you can start again with your project. So there might be a chance that this person also, he might also leave the firm, or he can go to a different location, or he might say that he is not interested. Then so such risks are not static. It might happen over and over again and again, right? So what you have to do is, so first time when you analyze such type of risk, what you do, you provide a resolution to that, and over a period of time you again analyze this risk and take a change the plan if you need. Okay. Next, we'll see a practical risk management approach. Okay, so here the concept of the risk exposure is rich. A simple practical way of doing the risk planning is to simplify, categorize the risk and impact in a few levels, and then use it for prioritization. So this is a particular approach. It is used in many organizations. Okay, so how can we do that? So there are 4 points. The first one is like, for each risk, rate the probability of its happening. Like it, the risk can be low priority or probability, medium probability or high probability. What is the chance of occurring it? You have to give a rating for it. Then second point, for each risk, assess its impact on the project, whether it is a low, medium or high. You have to rate the impact of the risk also. Then the third one is, rank the risk based on the probability and effects of the project. For example, a high probability, high impact item will have a higher rank than a risk item with a medium priority and high impact. In case of you have a confusion or a conflict, use judgment. Okay. The last one is, select the top few risk items for mitigations and tracking. Say, whenever you are analyzing the risk, you might come up with n number of risks. You cannot solve all those things. So once you prioritize the risk, take the few risk items that are prioritized, high priority, and then you can have the mitigation plan and you can track them. So the rate or a rate of probability or impact, rank, and the mitigation plan, how we can identify is like something like this table. So first you have to identify the risk here, then the probability of occurrence of that particular risk, the impact. If this risk occurs, what is the impact of that risk on our project? Then the third one is exposure. Okay, and the last one is your mitigation plan. So like this could be a checklist, and you can have your risk, the probability, the mitigation plan, everything, and you can solve the risk in your project. Okay, next we'll see about project monitoring plan. So we have two subcategories of it. The first one is measurements and the second one is project monitoring and tracking. So first we'll understand what is project monitoring plan. Okay, So your project management is nothing but it's a document that can be used to guide the execution of the project. That means when a specific module has to be started, when the testing has to be done, when acceptance testing has to become started. These all things, the schedule of your entire project. I have given just the example of testing and developing, but it is from the right day one, like the analysis, everything when it has to be started and completed. All these things have to be put up in a document. And so even if you have a good document, it becomes useless if it is not executed properly. So execution, it cannot be properly driven by the plan unless it is monitored carefully and the actual performance is tracked against the plan. So the data, or the monitoring plan, it contains your schedule, like when the specific task has to be started and completed. It can also contain the defects, efforts, everything. Okay, so your execution, it should be proper. So once you have the project monitoring plan, someone has to be there to execute it and check whether it is your project is going as per the plan or not. So this monitoring, it requires the measurements to be made to access the situation of the project. The measurements such as defects, defect density, effort, size, schedules all come here. So in addition to these measurements, like the data, measurements, it actually deals with the data. Okay. So this measurement data will be analyzed and reported, and it must also be planned in advance so that you can avoid the situation of getting into a situation where you have collected ample amount of information but you do not know what to do with the data. So you might not get into that particular situation. So you should have a proper document and the execution of that should be done properly. First, we'll see about the measurement. So the basic purpose of the measurements in a project is to provide the data to the project management about your project's current state, or it can be the defects, how many defects are open, how many are closed, what is the size of the project, what is the effort in person months, what is the project schedule, whether it is going on time or not. So these are all the measurements. So we'll discuss these measurements one by one, starting with the project schedule. So schedule is the important matrix because the most projects are driven by the schedules and the deadlines. So if you have this schedule properly, like if you have a document where it has properly distributed, like when a particular stage has to be started and when it has to be completed, the time required to complete each and every phase. So if it is there before your project start, it would be easier for the execution, and you can have a glimpse at this project schedule, and you can check the health of the project, whether it is going on time or you are lagging. So these things can be considered here. Next is the size of the project. So size, how do we judge it? So in terms of lines of codes what you have written, or it can be like um, the defect density. Okay, so basically these lines of code, you cannot just count it and take it, right? So what you can do is you can make use of the editors or the line counters, or you can also take for example you can take the function points, how many functions are present in the project, or it can be just the number of modules or number of features. It might suffice at some time. Okay, the next one is the effort, how many persons or the resource are consumed in a software project. Like if you have 10 persons in your project, so whether they are working properly or not. Suppose a person, say suppose 9 hours is the working time, whether he is working 9 hours completely on a project, or how many hours he is occupying it for a project, what he is doing. So all these things he has to monitor, he has to uh, manage in a system, and that system we call it as timesheet. So timesheet, it says, I mean, this timesheet will be for each and every person. What they have to do is they have to open this system and they have to log how many hours they have worked in a project. So if you take just the amount of time what is spent on the project, it might not be feasible. So for better performance or better monitoring, the effort spent on various tasks should be logged separately. That means if you are in the office for 9 hours and you are working 9 hours in a project, so this is not sufficient. So what you have done in these 9 hours, so you have to mention it, like for 3 hours I have done the requirement analysis, another 2 hours I have been coding. So these things have to be uh, separately logged. Okay, and the last one is tracking of the defects. Okay, so defects, it's a critical for ensuring your quality. So if you just keep the numbers like these many defects are there in a project, it might not suffice. So once the defect is found, you have to get the status of it, the priority of that defect, whether it is closed or still open. So these steps are needed for your defect. So whenever a defect, you find a defect in your project, so you have to make sure that it is closed. Okay, so you cannot just leave a defect as open and you can deliver the software to the client. Okay, so these are the important measurements in a project schedule, size, effort, and defects. Okay, the next one is project monitoring and tracking. The goal of your project managers for monitoring a project is to get the visibility into the project execution, whether it is going properly or not. If it is going properly, well and good. If not, then what action they have to take. So this thing, how they can do is like by project monitoring and tracking. So this monitoring, we have three stages of it. The first one is activity level monitoring, second is status reporting, and the third one is milestone analysis. So we'll discuss these levels in the monitoring one by one. Okay, the first one is activity level monitoring. So this ensures that each activity in the detailed schedule has done properly and within time. Again, this type of monitoring may be done daily in a project team meetings or by project manager by checking the status of the all task scheduled to be completed on the same day. So what does this activity level monitoring? It says like, so your project manager has to monitor your activities, whether the activity assigned to you, whether it has been completed or not. If not, what is the issue? If completed, how much percentage of it has been completed? Or a completed task if it is marked as 100% in the detailed schedule, like you have the one task has been assigned to you and you have completed it, there is no pending work on that. That means you have 100% done that thing. Suppose you have done only 80% of that thing, so your project manager might ask you, or what is the problem with it, why it has not been completed. So by this your project manager, he get a understanding that how many percentage of the activity has been completed or not. So this monitoring is to ensure that the project continues to proceed as per the planned schedule. If there is any lag, so he can give some measures to overcome it. Okay, the next one is status reports. Okay, these are prepared weekly to take the stock of what has happened and what needs to be done. So weekly in the sense, this might be taken every Friday or every Saturday. So in that particular status report, what will happen is, what would be the content of it is like, for that particular week, how much activity has been completed, or what is the pending task for that particular activity. So these things are been kept in that particular status report. So it means what has been done, what is pending, and the future one, like in the next week what things to be completed. These all things would be present in your status report. Okay, so it contains the summary of the activities completed since your last status report for the previous week, any activities that have been delayed, or any issues that your project need attention, everything will be kept here. Again, the purpose of this status report is to ensure that project is proceeding as per the planned schedule. The last one is milestone analysis. Okay, so in this milestone analysis, this happens every few weeks, like around 4 weeks or 5 weeks. Okay. So here what will happen is before the project gets started, your manager has to estimate, he has to check, like he has to have a initial plan for all the tasks, for your schedule, when a module has to be completed, when it has to be started, all these things he should have a basic plan. What are the things that would be done at what time, so he should have a plan for that. And once the project starts, he should track the actual things. Then there is a, if there is any difference, if there is any deviation between the actual and the estimated effort and schedule, so your project manager or the management, they'll get an idea that project may run into trouble and it might not meet its objective, not meet its objective. So this situation, it calls for the manager to understand the reasons behind the variations. What has, you know, went wrong? Then what is the measures to be taken so that it gets back to track? So apart from this cost and schedule, your defects also plays an important role over here. Okay. So how this thing, actual versus the estimated thing, can be known is through a graph. As you can see here, the x-axis, it gives the time, and the y-axis, it represents cost in money. The time is in months from Jan till December, and again from a Jan to December, like 2 years they have taken into consideration. Then they have drawn two curves. The dashed one is the planned budget, and the straight lines is the actual budget. Okay. So what will happen here is, so the planned ones, it has to be done before your project gets started. Okay, the planned ones. So for this graph, they have planned like from Jan to March, they'll do a requirement analysis, then coding, then then design, then coding of module 1, module 2. These things they have planned. When the project starts, the actual thing has to be marked on the graph. Okay, so the second curve is the actual expenditure in terms of your cost. So if there is any difference, if there is a huge deviation between these two curves, then your management, it will understand that it is going off track, your project is going off track. So each milestone or the achievements in the project, like a particular module or the requirement analysis phase or stage, when it has to be started and completed, those have to be marked on this particular graph, so that where your project is heading towards will get to be noted. Okay. The last topic here is detailed scheduling. Okay. So in this detailed scheduling, what will happen is your project manager, he will do this detailed scheduling. Okay. And while planning the milestones, all these milestones, whatever we have seen, right? Each stages. So these things are broken down. Okay. Such that each stage would be having a number of activities, and your project manager, what he will do is like, he'll estimate the time required for all these activities to complete it, a start date to it, end date to it, who has to work on that particular activity. Everything he will have it in a spreadsheet or any other tool. So this is the detailed scheduling your project manager does. So he has to refine the task to a level so that the lowest level activity, it can be scheduled to occupy no more than a few days and with a single resource. Okay, a single resource can do few activities, so there is no dependency on that. So when the activity has to be started, when it has to be completed, and who will work on that, so everything, each minute details has to be done in the detailed scheduling by your project manager. And he can do this in a spreadsheets or some other tools like Microsoft Project. Okay. Now activities related to your database management, coordination, project management, everything has to be listed here, and the schedule for those things and how many resources they consume, these all things have to be kept again in this detailed scheduling. And we have to understand here that this detailed scheduling is not static, right? Say suppose your project manager has done this document and he has kept it ready, it means it is not 100% or it is not static, it won't change. So this detailed scheduling is dynamic. Your plans might change in the middle of the project when it is executed. So if there is any changes in this plan, So your project manager has to ensure that whatever the decision has been taken, these are reflected back in the detailed schedule. Okay. So next we will have a quiz. The question is, what are the three levels of project monitoring? You have got a minute of time to respond. Okay, so time's up, and this completes your third chapter. From next session onwards, we'll focus on the fourth chapter. Okay, thank you.